Hi, this is Jim Jubileer with Jubileer Results Group, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Why You Suck at Hiring and What to Do About It. Feel free to use the chat box if you have any questions or comments as we roll along. So the old adage that people are your most important asset turns out to be wrong. The right people are your most important asset. And more importantly, the wrong people are your worst asset. What I'd like you to do now is type into the chat box and tell me how good job you do, meaning you and your company, in hiring people. We'll use a 4-point scale. What 4 means I'm amazing. We get top candidates every time. And a 1 means we got all dogs. So go ahead and type in the chat box how you would rate your ability as a hiring company. 4 being high, awesome. 3 being pretty good, but room for improvement. 2 is we get lucky. And 1 is we just suck at it. So go ahead, everybody, and
entry and exit chimes are off.
All right, we have some 3s, we have some 2s. So it turns out that most companies successfully hire top performers only 1 out of every 4 times, about 25%. Now, even if you're not very good at math, you can quickly come to the conclusion that that means 3 out of 4 times it's somebody a performer. And the way we analyze people is A, B, C, with A being the real top performers. They're in the top 10% of capabilities. The Bs are kind of in the middle, and the Cs are the ones that are actively causing problems. I'll just mute that line. Super. If you ever have any sound problems, just type that in the chat. So if we aren't so good at hiring, we need to take a hard look at why that is the case. And as one person said as we got on the start of this, hey, we're already doing a good job. Maybe we don't suck at hiring, but we still want to get better at it. But in a lot of situations, everybody is not doing as well as they would like to. So why is that? Let's take a look. One of the biggest reasons is it's hard to get good candidates. You have a weak pipeline, and we're going to talk about the steps you have to take to recruit everyone. People's resumes themselves don't give you enough information to assess them. When you bring them in for interviews, you're not going deep enough about their core values and their core competencies. And overall, the process is very time-consuming. So there's not enough time to really devote to everything. People feel rushed, they do it last minute, etc. When you conduct the interviews, frequently we just stay at a superficial level. And when it's time to check how accurate their references are, most reference checks are useless. So these are a couple of reasons why the hiring process in the typical companies I work with is inadequate and does not produce good results. We could actually make this a longer list of reasons of why you suck at hiring, but I didn't want to make the webinar too depressing for you. So if it's okay with you, we'll move on to look at what does bad hiring cost us. So I just want to take a minute about this. There's a link in the bottom, and by the way, after this call, you'll get the slides. So you can take notes if you want, but I will send you the slides directly. When we actually do a model and we build up line item by line item what the cost of turnover is, we see that a frontline supervisor manager might be as high as 4 times their annual salary. So let's say you have a $50,000 a year general manager over a chain of stores. 4 times that salary would be $200,000. Is that true? So that sounds kind of high. But when you think about people all the way up to the vice president level, it can be as high as 15 times their salary. And we have a process that we go through to help people uncover what are the true costs, the time you spent on hiring, the actual hard costs, but more importantly, the impact on the morale of the team can have a big implication for everybody else. And sometimes it's those soft costs that actually cost more than the hard costs. Does that make sense to everybody? It's really important that when we have to get clear about what the cost of bad hiring is so we can decide what kind of investment to make to fix that problem. All right. So what I want to talk about next is bias, which is, as humans, we aren't perfect. We have our own way of looking at things and are not able to completely see the whole picture. One of the major premises in Western thought that's rather silly is this belief that we have self-control. And you find that in other cultures around the world, they don't put self-control and willpower with the same amount of esteem that we do in the West. So why am I showing you that on today's webinar, and how could that possibly impact our hiring procedures? So what I want to walk you through now are a series of biases that we have as people. This isn't just about hiring. We are way too confident in our abilities, and that overconfidence turns out it's difficult to overcome. And I'm going to talk to you about what is being done to overcome these biases. And ironically or cruelly, the people who think they're more of an expert on something tend to be more inaccurate with their forecasts and their analysis than someone who thinks they're not an expert. So in other words, we're a lot less expert than we think we are. We're overconfident. We tend to weigh recent information more heavily. So for instance, we're going to recommend that you follow a set time frame in terms of when to interview candidates. If you're interviewing candidates all day, one each hour from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., you're going to think more highly of that final candidate just because you can remember them more. So that's called the recency effect. Affinity. We tend to like people who are similar to us or remind us of someone we like. We have a natural affinity for them. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having affinity and hiring people you like, but you may not be getting the best candidates as a result. So we want to be aware of the affinity bias. Beauty. We attribute qualities to people based on their appearance that aren't actually commensurate with their actual experience. So we like being around pretty people, and we give them more credit than is deserved. The confirmation bias is a particularly big deal, which is that we interpret evidence to support our prior beliefs, and then we ignore evidence that contradicts that. And this is one of the more stubborn biases. So I'll show you in the bias training that companies offer how they tackle that. We get tired as the day goes along. If you go to court and you go in front of a judge at 4 p.m., you're going to get a more harsh sentence than if you go in front of that same judge at 10 a.m. with that same infraction. So once again, if you're interviewing candidates all day, or let's say one day you're interviewing candidates in the morning and the next day you're interviewing candidates in the evening or afternoon, you may find that your ratings of the candidates you interviewed later in the day is lower. And I call that ego depletion. We simply get tired and we don't have an unlimited supply of energy throughout the day. The comfort effect is one of my favorite ones because it's kind of bizarre, but this effect has been replicated many times. If I'm sitting here interviewing you while I'm having my favorite cup of bulletproof coffee, I'm going to think more highly of you than if I'm drinking a cold beverage. And likewise, you'll occasionally see in some job hunters, job seeking training, they'll say, have a hot cup of tea or rub your hands together right before you walk in the room and shake the person's hand, because a warm handshake will convey a more positive impression than a cold handshake. Now, are we saying that people shouldn't be good at shaking hands? No, providing a firm and effective handshake is a good measure of how personable someone is, but someone who doesn't have that may cause you to overlook other qualities that they have. So these are a number of biases that we have, and they come through very clearly in the hiring process. Let me give you one example of that, which is musicians can be hired without you ever seeing them. So I'm the director of a symphony, and I'm looking to hire the violinist and the percussionist for my symphony. I can place the performer behind a screen and give them commands and have them audition and make my decision without ever seeing them. That's called a blind audition. Or I could do what is most commonly done. You bring the person out, you sit them down, you say, play this piece, and you make your assessment. Well, it turns out that symphonies hire 30% more women musicians when it's a blind audition. 30% more. So in other words, even amongst a symphony director whose sole job it is to hire on talent, shows a lot of gender bias. And we've seen the impact of gender bias in many, many other contexts as well. So when you're interviewing a job candidate for an office job, you can't do blind interviewing, but there are steps I'm going to show you help create a filtering system so that you don't make as many bad decisions. So the story about the blind hiring for musicians is really quite sobering, and it really points out the degree to which bias is built in. Now, this isn't me coming up with this. This is the most powerful, richest corporations in the world. And Google in particular is known for doing a lot of work around training their managers on how to be aware of and spot bias in themselves and in others. And this is bias in their thinking in general. We're not just talking about race, gender, ethnicity, etc. It's bias about, oh, we tried that before, that didn't work, so therefore it'll never work. Those types of thinking. So in the slides I'll send you will include a link to the bias training that Facebook, Microsoft, and Google offer. And some of that information is open source and can be really helpful for you in terms of how you might apply it in training your own company. So the point I would like to leave you with this module is we as humans are far from perfect. We pick our friends, we pick pretty people, we pick people that like what we like, etc., and we don't do a very good job accurately vetting candidates. So next I'd like to talk about what we call human intelligence versus what is sometimes called artificial intelligence, or AI. And I think all of these terms are very misleading and distracting. So I've already shown you we as humans are very biased. There was a study at Duke that showed upwards of 40% of our actions, our activities each day are done in a habitual and almost unconscious way. So to get here today, to get out of the house and go to your office or wherever you went today, how much energy did you expend brushing your teeth? Not very much. Why is that? So it turns out the brain is an energy hog. It uses a disproportionate amount of the body's whole energy to keep all those billions of neurons firing. And so the brain has evolved coping mechanisms over the eons to try to conserve energy. One way it does this is through heuristics, fancy word meaning decision rules. So when I see a red light, so I'm driving in my car, when I see a red light, I know I should stop because if I proceed through it, I'll enter traffic and be at risk. It sounds kind of simple, but it doesn't take a lot of thinking to know red light, foot on brake. And if you look at how we go through our day, it turns out a vast amount of our day, that's where we operate from. And particularly when we get stressed out or tired or there's confusing information, we're actually more likely to default back to our biased way of thinking. So right when we most need unbiased thinking is when we're doing it the least. So I really want to make the case that AI, artificial intelligence, it's actually just human intelligence that's been codified, can be more powerful and more effective, or at least it can be an adjunct to us in our work. So we want to look at human intelligence versus artificial intelligence. So in test after test, it turns out that algorithms outperform human hiring managers in a wide variety of jobs and settings. Now, when I say the word algorithm or AI, as a joke, I say it's the robots. Now, it's not really a physical robot like you're seeing in the picture, but it's a heuristic, an algorithm, a computer program that's been developed over time. That's what we're referring to when we say algorithms or AI. And just to titillate people and freak them out a little bit, I say let the robots do it. But I don't actually mean sitting across the desk from a robot talking to it. That's not what I'm referring to. Algorithms outperform human hiring managers in a wide variety of jobs and settings, ranging from frontline retail store clerks at Home Depot and Lowe's, all the way through to high-end professionals and executives. I'll ask everyone to put their phone on mute if they're not on mute. So it turns out, though, that we are very adverse to letting algorithms take over. And we're in the middle of a sea change right now. And if this isn't an issue that's on your radar, you will be hearing about it more and more over the next few years. You may have heard of autonomous driving, autonomous cars. Well, guess what? They're here, they work, they're going to be appearing on your street sooner than you think, and there's going to be a lot of people who don't want them around. And yet, it's coming. So it turns out that people penalize the artificial intelligence programs far faster than they penalize the human. With the autonomous car, the Google car crashed recently. It hit a bus. Nobody was hurt, but it was the first accident. Now, up till that point in time, they had logged some 3 million miles without an accident. And in that same amount of time, 3 million miles of human drivers would have caused 5,000 deaths and 30,000 accidents. So we're comparing one minor accident to thousands of deaths and tens of thousands of accidents over that same time. So the autonomous car example is just one use case, but it's a rather striking use case to show you that more and more this kind of AI is very accurate. Now, we may not like that, may make us uncomfortable, and I'm not saying we should let the robots take over everything everywhere, but I do want you to keep an open mind towards how can we use algorithms and other assessments to help us fight against our human bias. Does that make sense for everybody? Feel free to type in the chat if you have any questions. So let me repeat what I just said because I think it's so important. Let the robots do it because algorithms outperform human managers. They don't suffer bias. They don't have ego depletion. They don't have the beauty effect. They can more accurately get to the bottom of what a person's real strengths and weaknesses are and how good a fit they are for the company. And I'll show you an example of that. On the other hand, particularly if you're in HR, you may be sensitive to and understanding the aversion that people might have to this, and we have to get very skillful and mindful about how to overcome that aversion. So now what we want to turn to is how to create a high-performance culture. What we want to do is hire the top 10% of talent available to us in our labor market for the compensation you're willing to pay. That's what we call an A player. So I'm in the conference room with the CEO who was having a hard time with this, and he kept saying, well, you know, we don't want all A players. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't you want all A players? And then what came out is what he thought I meant was you want all type A people. And we both had a good laugh, and we're like, no, that's not at all what we're talking about. I don't mean type A, control freak, you know, high maintenance divas. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about A players versus B players versus C players. To create a high performance culture, you have to hire only A players. A's hire A's and B's hire C's. I'm a certified Gazelles coach. What that means is I'm one of 150 people worldwide that's been trained to develop a business growth framework captured in a book called Scaling Up. And our original book was called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. It's in use by thousands of companies, and it's very popular for companies that are growing and hiring, creating a strategy and an implementation plan for their business. Twice a year, we put a conference on. It's sponsored by Fortune magazine. It's called the Fortune Scaling Up Summit. And we had a speaker at our conference named Adam Grant. He's a professor at Wharton, the youngest tenured professor in Wharton's history, and his book is called Give and Take. If you're interested in psychology and if you're interested in this webinar, I highly recommend you read Adam's book. Adam tells us that there are givers who are more selfless oriented. There are takers who are more selfish oriented, and there are matchers. Matchers kind of respond to whatever the other person's presenting them. You've heard the saying, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. And that's because it's true. Literally, if there's a bad apple in a bowl of apples, all the other apples will go bad much quicker than if that bad apple isn't there. And that's true in your company as well. It's a bell curve. You may have 10, 20, 30% of your whole team are A players. You may only have 10% C players. That leaves 60% that are B players, and they're matchers. Another way to say that, when I said 10 to 20% givers, 10% takers, the rest matchers, all of a sudden you have those 60% of people matching that taking behavior, and your whole culture can spiral downhill. You know the statistics on employee engagement. 70% of American workers, and it's higher in the rest of the world, are some degree of disengaged at work, ranging from moderately to very disengaged. 7 out of 10. Most workplaces are toxic. That's because people join a company, but they leave because of poor relations with their manager. And most companies don't put enough training into those supervisory roles. So part of creating a high-performance culture is making sure that you provide the right training and leadership development. And another part of it is to make sure that you're only bringing in good people, the best people. A players hire A players because they themselves are confident. They're already winners. They want to be on a winning team. They're willing to bring in other people who will challenge them and help them grow. B players hire Cs because Bs aren't as confident. They would rather have people join the team that make them, the B player, look and feel good, and they're performing at a lower level. So we see in a lot of cultures that the B players just don't do as good a job on hiring Cs. So now I want to turn to what to do about it. So we spent some time looking at the cost of bad hiring, the amount of disengagement in the modern workforce, the biases that we have, the idea that AI can help us or algorithms, assessments can help us counteract some of our bias. Now let's turn and actually look at the actual steps needed to manage the process. I'm going to show you how to identify the right people, how to interview them, and the details to get into, and then how to verify that what they told you was true in the eyes of others. So I'm going to walk you through now on a step-by-step basis what the best practices in hiring are. To begin with, I want to talk about Hireology, which is a comprehensive platform that's going to make your process better, easier, and more productive. It's a software platform. When you get the slides, I'll send you a link. It'll include a link, and I can give you more information about it. That said, everything I'm going to describe in this process can be done in Excel, on notes, in spreadsheets, etc. So you don't have to use a software platform. But like we're seeing in every other part of business, and in fact every other part of life, when we have an app to help us, it greatly accelerates our competency, our throughput, our productivity, massive time saver. So I'll be talking a little bit more about some of the specific aspects of Hireology. In this presentation, I'm skipping over a very important step. I actually don't want to skip over it. When we get started, we have to figure out why we want a person. And I have a strategic workforce development module. And we come in, we sit down. What's the position? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Is this a people problem or a process problem? Maybe we need to change our workflow and not just hire another person. So we view hiring another person only as the last step in a series of assessments that we make to figure out what the business needs to accomplish its goals. Frequently, fixing the process and or helping people eliminate things that they're stuck on frees more productive bandwidth. You don't have to hire as many people as you think you do. So the strategic workforce planning module really occurs upfront, and then we turn to the actual hiring process itself. I hope that's all making sense to you. So frequently companies post a job description thinking it's a job advertisement. But job advertising is its own beast, separate from writing the job itself. When we write the job, we have a process called the job scorecard that includes the competencies that are required, the results that the person's expected to achieve, how those results are going to be measured through key performance indicators, KPIs, and obviously the skills and experience that we need. But you don't have to put all of that in a job ad. You want to make your company stand out and be unique. So we have some white papers that are available if you're interested, which list all the different job boards that you could post on and the best practices in how to write the job description itself. So behind this webinar are a series of other supporting materials. Give you, for instance, I'm working with a fast casual restaurant chain in the Midwest that operates in some small towns that are having difficulty in getting the right kind of people. And some of these people are literally minimum wage workers working, in the kitchen. So it's really frontline. For some people, it's their first job entering the workforce, all the way on up to a store manager, a restaurant manager, assistant manager, et cetera. And we've gone in at the state level and looked at all the resources that the state offers through veterans retraining programs and other job service centers that are administered through the various government agencies that get involved with workforce development. So one question for you is, have you looked at veterans retraining programs? And have you explored all the other places you could go to advertise your jobs? So candidate recruitment is obviously a huge issue. We won't get completely to the bottom of that today, but that's something that we spend a lot of time with our clients to make sure we're casting as wide a net as possible. Now, if you're the typical small business, medium-sized company like I work with, you're already stressed out. You're already overworked. You're being pulled in too many different directions. So the last thing you want is to cast a wider net and have to wade through 100 different resumes. So it's a real conundrum of how do we cast a wider net and yet be more efficient at the same time. Fortunately, Hirology solves that through integration with job boards. With one click, your job is posted on Indeed. Right now, Indeed is the leading source for candidates in a wide variety of industries. We're using Indeed to recruit everybody from psychiatrists to guys who are cutting grass, to people who are working in, the restaurant service industry. And everybody's, Indeed is producing a very attractive candidate flow. Hirology uses Indeed Apply, which is an API, a programming interface, where the candidates Indeed profile automatically populates their job application so they don't have to fill out the application itself. With the integration with Indeed Apply, some companies have seen as much as a 3 times increase in the number of candidates applying. Now, we may not just use job boards. Some companies have in-house recruiters that are reaching out to current A players who are happy inside their existing companies. So not everybody that's an A player is on a job board. You want to make it easy to post on your social media and on your employees' social media. Do you offer a bounty? In other words, if a candidate refers someone who gets hired and stays on through their probationary period, does the employee get some kind of a bonus, a bounty? Employees are eager, particularly A players are eager to promote their company to their own audience. And so syndicating it out to your employees' social media has been very effective. The next step is to pre-screen candidates. And in the Hirology platform, the SmartRank survey automatically is delivered to each candidate. And it's a series of 10 simple true-false questions that have been pre-developed based on what the job description itself is to help you more quickly assess whether they would be worth moving forward to the phone screen. So that initial SmartRank survey is not intended to be completely comprehensive. It's just intended to give you a score about whether it's worth it to move a person forward. So at this point in our process with the companies that are following this, they have four pieces of information. They have the applicant's cover letter, and on the cover letter, we place some questions, just 2 or 3 questions to let them write open text why the position is of interest to them. The second would be the cover letter, very important to see how clear their thinking and their writing skills are. The third is the SmartRank survey score that goes from 0 to 100. If they scored less than 80, it's probably not worth phone screening them, we have found. Maybe you interview the people that scored at the 70% level, but nothing lower. At this point, you're able to move forward in the next step without ever having looked at their resume. I know it sounds too good to be true, but you can do it that way. Now, most people still look at resumes out of habit, but you actually don't have to. You have enough information to determine whether the people are going to move forward with those 3 other pieces of information: the application open text questions, the cover letter, and the SmartRank survey. Now, what we want to do is interview the best prospects. And we break that into 3 different discrete steps. The first step is a phone interview. Now, some of you are smaller companies and maybe you're only hiring 1 or 2 people a year. Others of you are high volume hires and you might be hiring 50 or 100 people a year. I have frequently seen a conflict between the HR manager and the line managers about who should do this screening. Because the line manager says, well, we know the job, you can't screen. And the HR people are like, you're bringing a lot of people and you shouldn't waste your time with, let us do it. This completely solves that entire problem because the phone screen is pre-developed and follows a set of questions, once again, also tailored based on the job description itself, that allow you to quickly and easily determine whether it's worth it to bring a person forward. So a phone screen is a simple 20 to 30-minute interview, and all you're deciding is yes, no, maybe. Yes, definitely bring them in. No, definitely not. And maybe there's some people you're not sure, so you keep them in the active pool, but you don't invite them in. The second interview, which is the first in-person interview, we call the achievements, which is what have you done? And this is what's typically done in job interviews. Tell me about your schooling, tell me about your work experience, what have you done? You're taking some of the time to sell the company to them. It's kind of a straightforward interview, but it may not get at what's in their heart and who are they as people. So the second interview at a separate time involves the elements of success, which are a series of competencies. And I'm going to show you how the competency model works. Doing competency-based behavioral interviewing guarantees that you're going to get better candidates, not better applicants. At this point, they're in the funnel, but that you're going to better assess who the right people are. So 3 interviews. The first one's on the phone. The next 2 are in person. It's recommended best practice that every interview have 2 interviewers, 2 people on your side speaking to the candidate. And after the interview, the 2 interviewers compare their scores. What did you like? What did you dislike? And getting the 2 interviewers to talk and then agree gives you a better assessment and a better interview. So sometimes called tandem interviewing or paired interviews. It's always recommended as a best practice. So we want to be much, much more thorough in our interviewing following a standardized script. Why is that? Because it allows us to focus on the candidate, not on, oh God, they said that, what's my next question going to be? So we put a lot of attention on a standardized scripted interview for each of these 3 interview types. And I can't stress enough how important that is, because one person might be a good interviewer, one person might be a bad interviewer. Why should you leave it up to the skill of the interviewer? Follow a standard script. Typical job funnel, an Indeed ad might generate, say, and these are not true for every position in every market. These are just averages. We get 100 applicants, and of those 100 applicants, we get 50 who scored well enough on the SmartRank survey, but we only interview half of them. So we might do a phone screen. We get 50 candidates, but only, 100 applicants, 50 of whom complete the SmartRank survey, but only half of the people who completed the SmartRank survey scored very high. So we're already down to 25 people. And of those 25, we might choose to do a phone screen on 8 or 10 of them based on how well they wrote their cover letter and answered the open text questions on their application. And out of the phone screen, you typically move about half of those people forward. So you might have 5 people in for that first interview. And for the finalists, maybe 2 or 3. So we follow in our funnel the rule of halves. Usually each step cuts half the people out. This isn't always true. The numbers vary widely, but just to give you an idea, you shouldn't have to do 20 phone screens just to get 1 candidate. If you are, your pre-screening process isn't robust enough. So now we want to do a much deeper dive on, I sometimes call them the finalists. It's the 3, 4, 5, maybe it's only 2 people who we really, really like. And we want to see if they're a fit for our company and a fit for the position. In the earlier interviews, we already interviewed for things like education and work experience. So I want to introduce the idea that each job should have a series of competencies. Take a look at this chart and you'll see on the upper left, it says risk-taking. Risk-taking is a competency. Some people are willing to just, jump out of planes and jump off of bridges, and others aren't. On the upper right, another competency, an example of one, is IQ, intelligence. So for each job, we generate 4 to 8 competencies, and we're mindful of the fact that some of those competencies are trainable, relatively easy to change, whereas others are more difficult to change, and therefore we have to make sure when we're hiring that a person already has those competencies coming in. One of the ways we do this is with Caliper. Caliper is a third-party company, been around for a long time, 50 years, 3 million assessments, and they have an algorithm, a job fit matching test. And you administer this test to the applicant. One way that this process saves a lot of time is you literally just click a button, the applicant gets an email based on a template you had written ahead of time, introducing them to Caliper, and then it's up to them to take it. I like to administer the Caliper test between the first and the second interview, and then bring a person back for the second interview. Bring the person back once their Caliper is completed, so part of my assessment in the second interview is based on what Caliper has told us. So let's take a look at what Caliper is. There are 30 job families, and one of the things you get is a score of how good a fit this person will be to that job. Now, how do we know that? Well, the Caliper model includes 30 different job families. So I'm going to look at a family called mid-level manager, because that's a job, not a job family, because that's a position we're frequently hiring for. So you can see that on the left of the chart here. So the mid-level manager model includes 9 different competencies, and they're highlighted by bolding. So how good they are in their leadership communication, how good they are in managing processes, whether they know how to fit inside a company, the organizational savviness they have. So there's a whole family of competencies, and underneath each of the competencies is an operational definition. So under one called decisiveness, the definition that we're looking for is mid-level managers tend towards taking calculated risks, even in the absence of all information. So calculated risk in the absence of all information. So I was interviewing a candidate this morning, and in a position like this, I said, tell me a time when you had to make a decision that you were uncomfortable about because you didn't have all the information you wanted. And those behavioral interviewing questions forces the person not to talk about what they think it ought to be, but how it actually was for them in a specific example. So the competency modeling is kind of in the background of the Caliper algorithm, but it's brought forward when you see the person's actual score. So the Caliper tool has been well validated, millions of assessments, and we rely very heavily on a person's Caliper score to know whether they would be a good fit for the job. We rely on the human interviewers to assess whether they would be a good fit for the company and the culture. Everybody with me so far? So now what we have to do is turn away from the applicant themselves and start checking our references, whether or not other people who have actually worked with them can say how well they did. The problem is most reference checks are practically useless. Hierology solves that problem by building an automated system. Let me explain it to you. The candidate gets an email saying, first of all, when you interview people, you remind them as part of getting hired here, you have to arrange interviews with your former managers. It's called the truth serum. People that aren't afraid of the truth say, hey, bring it. People that are afraid of the truth, they run from it. So C players drop out much quicker when you tell them the truth serum right up front. We're going to ask you to arrange interviews with your former managers. Now, the way we do that is the applicant gets a link to a web platform, and in the web platform, they enter the email addresses of their former managers, and then those people get a link to a survey. Now, if you're like me, you'd say, oh, people aren't going to fill that out, and you would be shocked at the high degree of compliance we get. Now, why is this? Because A, players don't burn bridges. They're happy to have people assess them. C, players aren't. So once again, it's another deselection criteria. People tend to drop out. So we ask people to put in 5 managers, but we get the report when 3 of them have replied, but it's all anonymous. So we don't see who did it. What you're looking at here is the report that you get within the system showing the scores from managers and all references who rated the candidate. And the overall score, low, medium, and high, and then a detailed breakdown of what is driving that. So we will pause for a moment while the webinar decides to change the slide. This is a detailed report, and I know the print is small. Sorry. It'll pop back up in a moment. This is a detailed report on the candidate on a series of competencies: managing others, professionalism. There's a series of criteria. How did they do? And so all of those manager scores are compiled together into one report. At this point, you've only brought in the best people. You found out what they've done through the achievements interview. You found out who they are by measuring their competencies and their cultural fit, core value fit. You use the Caliper job fit matching score, and now we look at the references. The way it works over and over again, we've seen it many, many times, is the A players, it's not very complicated. It comes through in all of these assessment layers or levels. They rise to the top. If you just go on your interviews alone and it's just you by yourself, not a second person, you're going to be way biased. You're going to go off track. Or you're going to like where they went to school, or they had a sexy job just before this one. It's very easy for us to get off track. We might like them and they might be a great candidate, but they might score low in Caliper. I had one candidate who was great, presented well, said the right things. But when I looked at their Caliper score, I realized I, as the interviewer, was sloppy. I overlooked a couple things. I didn't dive deep. And when we had an additional meeting, tell me about follow-through when follow-through was difficult. Turned out she was not very good with follow-through, which is something that I needed. And so we see that tying the Caliper feedback makes us a better assessor of talent. And then the second to last piece here, which I'm showing you, is getting the feedback from previous managers. A players score high, without a doubt. C players don't even finish the process. B players, maybe you get a report on them, but they don't look too good. There's one final step in the hierology process. I don't have a slide on it. If you need to check credentials like education, drug testing, driving infractions, all of that is built into the platform. So there's a back-end credential check as well. So at this point, we've gone through many steps, all of which are considered best practices in hiring. I want to turn just for a moment to once you've made an offer, we're not going to talk about compensation, job negotiations, none of that today. But I want to transition to a new topic, which is once a person is on board, how do you ensure that you're going to build a high-performance culture? By the time you brought someone on board, you have a rich bio on them. You know their strengths and weaknesses and their fit. So you want to be leaning in towards where do we know they're going to do a good job, where might we need to coach them and support them more. We ask each supervisor to ask these 4 questions at the end of every day for the new employee's first 3 weeks. Did you understand what was expected of you? Were you able to do it? What challenges did you face? And what do you need from me in order to help you do your job better? If you ask these simple 4 questions every day at the end of each day for the first 3 weeks, you will know where you stand. And we believe in the hire slow, fire fast model. The reason why most companies suck at hiring and why disengagement is at 70% is because most companies hire fast and fire slow. So you want to build a probationary period in so that the candidate knows we're going to have a formal sit down after 3 weeks and talk about whether this is working for both of us. And if not, you can proceed to termination much more quickly and easily than if you don't set that probationary expectation up ahead of time. So this is Jim Jubileer, Jubileer Results Group, covering a webinar entitled Why You Suck at Hiring and What You Can Do About It.